I'm really rich. Ever since the day back in 2015 when he first ran for president, Donald Trump's always boasted that his rightful place among the high and mighty was A, proof of his valor, and B, evidence that to drain the swamp, you need somebody who knows where the bodies are buried in the corrupt circles of Wall Street and Washington. So why is the MAGA base broken with Trump over the Epstein files? Why can't this populist leader, who beat allegations of an attempted coup with the storming of the Capitol, one who's seemed to bend the Constitution to his will at times since his re-election, why can't he make this story go away? Remember, Trump ran against entitlement. And even when he's threatening to withdraw the license of a TV network because its White House correspondent asks about the case, does the threat still carry? Does it still have the same weight? How does his base now feel about siding with dictators over slaying journalists and about tax breaks for the rich? Today in the France 24 debate, why are the Epstein files dogging Donald Trump? With us from London, he served as a high-ranking federal prosecutor in the U.S. Justice Department, lead prosecutor in the FBI Special Counsel Robert Mueller's probe into Russian interference in the 2016 elections. Andrew Weissman, professor at NYU School of Law. Thanks for being with us.
Welcome. Nice to be here.
From Washington, Republican strategist Dan Hazelwood, president of Targeted Creative Communications. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
And from Norman, Oklahoma, Allison Shortle, associate professor of political science at the University of Oklahoma, the author of The Everyday Crusade, Christian Nationalism in American Politics. Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
You can, by the way, also listen, like, and subscribe to the France 24 debate wherever podcasts are streamed. Now that the bill's nearly unanimously passed both houses of Congress, aides to the president say Donald Trump will sign this bill releasing the Epstein files, quote, whenever it gets to the White House. But as Simon Moritz reports, that may not be enough to clear the air.
I was 16.
This was me at 17.
It was a historic day for the victims of disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein. The U.S. House of Representatives and Senate both moved on Tuesday to release files related to the convicted sex offender who had ties to some of the most powerful men in the country.
It sends a message that Americans are finally sick and tired of a Epstein class of rich and powerful men who thought they could get away with anything. I mean, it was sick to create a rape island where young girls were taken and trafficked, and it's a horrific moment in our history. It is going to be something we have to grapple with as a nation.
Ro Khanna is the Democrat representative who introduced the bipartisan Epstein Files Transparency Act into the House of Representatives. The text, which U.S. President Donald Trump said he will sign into law, contains several provisions. It will require the Department of Justice to publish within 30 days all unclassified materials it has in a searchable and downloadable format that relate to the Epstein investigation. That includes information on his girlfriend and accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell, and the names of anyone involved, including government officials. Epstein took his own life in 2019 while in custody on charges of sex trafficking of minors, while Maxwell remains behind bars for her role in the affair. Thomas Massie is the Republican representative who introduced the bipartisan bill, and he is already demanding repercussions.
Well, you know, there's becoming a reckoning in Britain that needs to happen in the United States. A prince lost his title. The ambassador to the United States lost his job. We need to see those same kind of consequences here.
That reckoning has already started with former Harvard president and ex-Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, who has renounced his public commitments after his name came up in the files that were released last week. Trump socialized with Epstein in the 1990s and 2000s, but says that he broke off the friendship over what he calls a rift. Former President Bill Clinton, like Trump, was also once close to Epstein, but neither man has been formally accused of any wrongdoing.
Yeah, let me begin with you, Allison Shortle. You're sitting in Oklahoma, a state that solidly votes Republican, and we saw with those images in that report a rare moment of bipartisanship in Washington. Why is this issue getting such solid approval from both sides of the aisle?
It's a valid question.
why would something so scandalous unite people when we are so polarized? The easiest answer is that conspiracy theories are more palatable, they're more accessible for Americans to understand versus a strictly policy issue. So you might hear a lot about immigration. Americans are very polarized on immigration and everything else. They are uniting on this for different reasons. So we have liberals and the nation's Democrats who very much want to open up these files because they presume that there is going to be a link to Donald Trump and that this will be embarrassing for the leader of the country right now. Meanwhile, you have Republicans who are our nation's conservatives by and large. They have bought into what Trump himself has already sold, that the Epstein files should have been opened under Joe Biden. And this is something he hammered home quite a lot in his bid for his second term, which was interrupted by the Biden presidency. So this is something that all Americans support, but for very different reasons. The Trump allies and typical MAGA country, they want to see people held accountable. They want to, as Trump promised, drain the swamp. So they want to see these powerful members held accountable, as do many liberals and Democrats. But let's not get ourselves twisted here. The real reason is definitely politically based, but the two different bases, Democrats and Republicans, have very different reasons why they want these files released.
You use the word conspiracy. Is the conspiracy what happened, which is proven factually? Is the conspiracy that the names have not been made public?
The conspiracy is who is actually in those files. So it's very easy to manufacture hidden relationships. And you'll see Donald Trump do this himself, possibly, right? We don't know if it's a conspiracy or if it's factual until we have the evidence. But Donald Trump himself is really trying to steer people's eyes towards Bill Clinton in particular, steer their attention that way, claiming that Bill Clinton will end up in these files. How he knows that, we don't really know. How anybody would know what happens to be in those files other than someone who was involved with Epstein himself, we don't really know. So conspiracy here can be anything, but it's very popularized in MAGA country, in places like Oklahoma, where the Epstein case has been linked to several powerful people, whether that has evidence to it or not.
All right, so making the rounds, an interview with Jeffrey Epstein's brother expressing fears that the juicy bits of these federal documents will not only be redacted, but erased. So let me ask you, Andrew Weissman, as a former senior member of the Justice Department, how easy is it to put things through the laundry and the dryer, if you will, when you have these kinds of documents?
I actually think it would be very hard to do that because if you have documents that were obtained, for instance, let's just say from Google, because we're dealing with a Gmail account, even if somebody at the Department of Justice, and I'm not saying they would, but let's assume that they decided that they were going to destroy it, it exists somewhere else. And so the chances of getting caught of the fact that you did that are fairly high. So I don't think that would happen. I think that what I do think there's a distinct possibility is that even with Donald Trump signing this bill, he will not turn over all of the documents. And one of the reasons I say that is this whole idea of what Congress is doing is a little bit of kabuki theater, because if the president really thought that these documents should be released, he doesn't need to wait for Congress. He is the head of the Department of Justice. He says that all the time. The Supreme Court has backed him on that issue. He could turn over the documents now, today, at the moment that we are talking on this show. He doesn't need a congressional bill. He could turn it all over, and he is not doing that. And so one of the reasons that I think there's this conspiracy theory and people are suspicious on the right, left, middle, for various reasons, as noted, is why he isn't doing that. Why is it when he has the power to do all of that, that he is not taking any action at all to release these documents?
Andrew, I want to ask Dan Hazelwood to react to that. But first, let me just ask you, because you said it's hard to erase federal documents these days when it's things like emails. We remember the Iran-Contra scandal, and that was in a different era. Back then, you could use the shredder. Are you saying that it's the adage that life is on the record is even more real today than it was before?
Well, I think, yes. Just remember what we're talking about is, does the Department of Justice have the sole copy of something? If they don't have the sole copy, which is so true when you're dealing with electronic data, you might try and delete or get rid of what you have, but that doesn't mean that you've gotten rid of it in every location where that document exists. And today, when you do a criminal investigation, I've been a federal prosecutor for many, many years. When you're dealing with electronic data, you're always getting copies of things that exist elsewhere. So yes, you could try to do it. You might have limited temporary success, but the chances that you're going to be able to eradicate and destroy for all time all copies of an incriminating document, I think would be difficult, not impossible, but difficult to do.
Yeah, a new poll by Ipsos for the Reuters news agency points to, massive disapproval of Trump's handling of the Epstein files. Moreover, 70% of respondents feel the government is hiding the client list, including 60% who identify as Republicans. If you look at there, you see the part in yellow, only 17% of those same Republicans say they trust the government's handling of those documents. Dan Hazelwood, why didn't Donald Trump just release the files? And he could have then, from a strategy point of view, laid a counterfire and said, what concerns me is fake and what concerns the others is true.
Well, I don't know why he didn't. I think my assumption is that he just thought he could move forward on his other agenda items, and that this was old news, and he didn't want to worry about it anymore. It just wasn't particularly relevant for him. I think what continues to animate this is a belief in society generally, and it's true on the conservative. It's also true amongst a lot of other non-conservative portions, where many people assume that the rich and powerful, the rules are different. And something was going on. It's clear something was going on. There's been convictions. There's been an investigation. So calling this a conspiracy, yes, a conspiracy about who may be on this list, but there's actually been real world, convictions that have gone on here. There's real world victims here. And the story keeps surfacing in very weird ways as pieces. As you in the introduction mentioned, the Andrew Windsor, I think is now his name in the United Kingdom. There's been other people who have had stories about them. People have leaked various documents. So there's pieces out here that keep this story alive. And, society wants to know what's in there and who's being, what's being hidden. And that's sort of natural. The Democrats decided, since Trump seemed less interested, they decided to jump all in on this, partially because they believe there's a good conspiracy wherever Donald Trump is. They jump in this over and over again. I think we're going to come out at the end, as we see the documents get released, we're going to see people getting embarrassed, in trouble. Your coverage mentioned Larry Summers, the former Treasury Secretary and advisor to Obama and Biden. So we're going to continue to see people getting embarrassed and maybe worse. Cards are going to come out. I think the idea that we're going to get to the end of this is one of the other myths. I mean, we just released all the Kennedy assassination files, apparently, and there's still people who are saying, oh, no, there's still secrets that are being kept. So that's where the conspiracy will live on.
And how does Donald Trump at this point get ahead of the story, since he tried to kill the release of those files and now has to go along with it? If you were advising him, again, from a political strategy point of view, what would you tell him?
Well, to be clear, he doesn't listen to my advice. So, but Donald Trump is a master of getting to the front of the parade. And I think all these people who imagine that this is somehow a crack or a fissure and we're about to see the end, like we've seen this story 50 times before where, oh, this is the end. It's like, no, it's not. He's going to, I don't know what he's going to do when he signs this, but he's going to be able to say, brag about being the one, bringing this out into the open. He's going to brag about his Justice Department finally bringing truth and facts to the victims. He's going to be at the front of this parade. And a lot of people who thought, oh, we're going to get him this time, are going to sit there and they're going to be like, oh, well, not again.
Alison Shortall, you agree? At the end of the day, the old Oscar Wilde line, the only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about. Donald Trump will have the limelight, and that's what matters?
I do tend to think we've been here before. And Donald Trump tends to handle these things well. He, no matter what happens, he can deflect or he can just lean into what he does as being evidence of what is good for democracy, no matter what. That could happen. It could be the case that this is the first time that something very embarrassing is in that file about him, and somehow it is successfully used by perhaps members of his own party to perhaps dislodge him. I can't see it being some huge win for Democrats, if I'm being completely honest. But I can see it as showing some weakness within the Republican Party, particularly the former Tea Party contingent versus some other conservatives who have already tried to express concerns about Donald Trump, but have not successfully been able to put that into action.
All right, even if Donald Trump rides this out, it seems like it's a little bit of a sore subject to ask him about it. Just look at the Bloomberg News Agency reporter who got called piggy on Air Force One, or the ABC News White House correspondent when she posed the question about the Epstein files to the president.
You're a terrible person and a terrible reporter. As far as the Epstein files is, I have nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein. I threw him out of my club many years ago because I thought he was a sick pervert. But I guess I turned out to be right. But you know who does have? Bill Clinton, Larry Summers, who ran Harvard, was with him every single night, every single weekend. They lived together. They went to his island many times. I never did.
Again, a political strategy question here. Dan Hazelwood, does that sound like a man on the defensive?
This is one where this is actually Trump 101, which is, oh, I get to have my foil of the press. I'm going to go after them. He makes points that are seemingly accurate, that are seemingly based in the evidence as we know it. There was a separation years ago. There was a victim who came out who said that, yes, they knew Trump and Trump was not involved. So, I think this is he's a little frustrated, perhaps because he's not controlling this the way he might want to, but also he's on to other things. I just don't see this at the end of the day actually materially mattered. And I think the whole idea that we're going to have some sort of Loch Ness Monster revelation come out in this is just a little fanciful on everybody, all the spectators' parts.
Andrew Weissman, it's a game of two halves, and at the end, Trump wins?
I don't think so. Your question about sort of what is the right political strategy here is such a good one, because the political strategy here would be just turn the stuff over and move on. Now, this is death by 1,000 cuts. It is over and over again in the news, and it is hurting him in the polls that you just showed. And so the logical conclusion is that there's something in the files that would hurt him, because it doesn't make any sense that you wouldn't just turn the stuff over and pull the Band-Aid off. And we already know from the material that has been released that Congress obtained from the Epstein estate that DOJ said they did not have. The Department of Justice said they did not get this. Congress got it from the Epstein estate. Has Jeffrey Epstein saying Donald Trump knew about the girls? That's his term. I wouldn't use that, but he is using it. presumably to talk about underage women. Now, that's Jeffrey Epstein saying that. It may or may not be true. But here, if you are Donald Trump, the politically wise thing would be just turn everything over unless there's something in there. And so to me, I think this is one where we really have to wait and see, what happens here, because he is not helping himself with the polling that shows that the vast, vast majority of the United States thinks that something is really fishy here and that the files should be turned over.
By the way, this isn't all about Donald Trump. There's other rich and powerful people who are also involved in this story. Jeffrey Epstein's victims testifying in front of the Capitol on Tuesday.
This is me at 16 when I met Jeffrey Epstein. Now I'll start. It is an honor to stand here before the American people. However, I shouldn't have to stand here at all. I'm here because as a child, I was pulled into Jeffrey Epstein's world, a world built on exploitation and manipulation of innocence and the protection of powerful men and women who believed that they were untouchable.
Powerful men and women who believed that they were untouchable. Andrew Weissman, those 1,000 paper cuts, it's not just Donald Trump who's affected.
That is absolutely true. And it is a very fair point that we're focusing on this because we've got information and concerns with respect to the president of the United States. But as you've noted, there are many other people here. There are Democrats, Republicans, who are potentially going to have a lot of answering to do. There's some information that has already come out, and the victims want to hold those people to account, and at least in the court of public opinion, in terms of what they knew and their complicity, and in terms of their potential actions here. So it is very, very fair to talk about this in a bipartisan way, and that there is going to be information that makes people look not very good. And you already have people talking about the fact that they regret what has happened. And so that's a fair point. But while you're seeing Larry Summers, the Harvard professor, taking responsibility, stepping back, the issue is he is doing that, but you don't see the repercussions yet with respect to official conduct and pulling back by the president of the United States. You just have a denial on his part, and so far a refusal to turn over documents that he could turn over today.
Alison Shortall, preying on underage girls, that is a universal topic. It provokes outrage all over the world. Where you are in Oklahoma, is this more of an issue than in other places?
I would not say that it's not an issue anywhere. I don't think in Oklahoma it's more of an issue than in other areas. But I will say that there are places like Oklahoma and in the United States in particular that have different laws, different types of oversight in order to protect freedoms. I'm originally from Vermont, a very liberal state in the US that has had a lot of protections for people who are seemingly bad, right? People who commit certain crimes, who typically would go on a list. If you are a sexual predator in the United States, you can be put on a list so all of your neighbors can see where you are and where all of the sexual predators are. States, both liberal and conservative, tend to protect rights of individuals from things that they think are unfair and unjust. One of those is a big question about what to do with predators, and does it violate their rights to essentially out them after they've already gone to prison, served their terms, and essentially done what they were supposed to do to re-enter society. So it's not just conservative states where this is a problem. It's liberal conservative states in the US where we're really trying to grapple with how we would ever handle issues such as this without violating citizens' rights, which is important. We tend to forget that when we have something so vicious as children being violated, of course, is an emotional topic, and we don't want that to happen. But it's complicated in terms of wanting to protect everybody's rights involved, including the victim. But certainly, it's a difficult issue here in Oklahoma, as it is everywhere around the world.
And what? How do you? Are there dots to be connected between fictitious conspiracy theories like Pizzagate, which a few years back there was this far-right conspiracy that Hillary Clinton and her ilk were trafficking children from a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. It was completely false. And the real-life crimes committed by Jeffrey Epstein.
Well, I think in general, the dots to be connected are that people love conspiracy theories. Or they, I am a public opinion researcher. I ask on survey questions people's propensities to engage in conspiracies. And the vast majority of Americans say that they believe in one or two. About a quarter of Americans are very entertained by all conspiracy theories and regularly look them up and make them part of their worldviews. And all of that contributes to sort of our understanding of how people trust government, which is to say that conspiracy theorists are largely disaffected and they're looking for something to make sense of the world. And conspiracies offer this through line, this ideology that they can connect themselves to that makes politics make sense. And it makes all of these bad things in the world sort of make sense if they can only get rid of the bad people. When in fact, actual change towards the better, it should entail a lot of systematic changes, a lot of structural changes to make sure that our laws are working for the people. And in fact, are not benefiting just the rich in society or just one group in society.
So, Andrew Weissman, is this, in light of what you just heard there from Allison, is this a story that shows that United States democracy is resilient? Because here you have bipartisan lawmakers pushing back against the executive branch of government, working on ways in which the state can protect the vulnerable, or is this just a sign that politicians are pandering to those who just don't believe anymore anything they hear?
I think it's too soon to say that democracy in the United States is resilient. I mean, I hope that you are right. I'm sure everyone on this program hopes that you are right. And the reason I think that it's too soon is one of the things that is a sign of our democracy is having the rule of law, but and that has traditionally meant that the Department of Justice is apolitical. That is a norm that's been followed for Democratic and Republican administrations. And there's really been a separation of the Department of Justice from the White House since the Nixon era. But in connection with the Epstein case, and it just happened in the last 2 days, the President of the United States directed the Department of Justice. That already is something that doesn't happen because the White House is normally supposed to be separate from the Department of Justice. But here the President has directed the Department of Justice to open an investigation of the Democrats who he says are in the Epstein files. And so not only do you have that norm breaking down of separation of the White House from the Department of Justice, but the idea that you would only go after Democrats. I mean, if people are in the files and should be investigated, so be it, but that would apply to everyone you don't have a rule that says you only go after Republicans or you only go after Democrats. That is a sign of an unhealthy democracy where the rule of law is not applying. So I don't think from the Epstein case, you really can say, there's reason to be optimistic and hopeful. But I hope that you're right, that we can be back here at some point where we say that the democracy in the United States has been resilient.
Dan Hazelwood, do you agree, after all, Richard Nixon, his Attorney General, John Mitchell, was implicated very much so in the Watergate scandal that brought down the then U.S. president. The fact that you have this Attorney General, the Justice Minister in the U.S., Pam Bondi, the head of the FBI, Kash Patel, that are so close to the president, that this is a blurring of lines that's dangerous for democracy?
I think there's two things. First of all, let me agree with my colleague that I don't think the Epstein case is going to make a case for or against democracy in the United States. I think in 20 years, it's going to be looked back at like a weird academic thesis of what was this all about. This will pass, except for the victims who will continue to suffer. But there was an important caveat that was put in there. Since Nixon, this is in the lifetime of myself and I think many of us on this program. Before Nixon, Johnson, Kennedy, you had J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI. There were very political and nasty interventions that were occurring and abuses of power, and the American democracy not only continued but flourished. This is going to be one of those episodes that we will talk about in years to come. There were clearly targeted investigations that were ordered by the Biden administration against conservatives, targeting them for IRS audits and other things. There were a variety of abuses of power. This is sort of, I hate to say, I like the idea that we're going to have this immaculate government that's not going to be involved in what goes on, but that is not human nature, and that has not been the case for a long time. I like the idea that it ought to be. I'm in favor of that, so I'm not arguing against it. I'm just saying let's be a little bit realistic, but I do want to agree with my colleague. The Epstein files are not going to be an argument for or against democracy. Democracy's doing fine. This is part of what the system is about, which is ugly disagreements get refereed through the election process. That is our system, and it's working.
All right.
It doesn't look great at times, but it's working.
All right. A lot of questions still over Jeffrey Epstein, not just the circumstances of his death in 2019. He's been depicted at times as a financial wizard who made his fortune through brilliance. A closer look, though, points to a bagman sometimes who knew how to network and keep the money of his benefactors away from the taxman. Last month, the New York Times reported on how disgraced investment fund billionaire Leon Black frequented Epstein starting in the 1990s, entrusting the former high school math teacher with tax optimizing his personal millions. After his first sex offense conviction in 2012, he began advising Mr. Black using, quote, his connections at JP Morgan Chase, the bank, where Mr. Epstein was a prized client, to seek a loan for Mr. Black. In one email, he told a banker he was advising on the $120 million purchase of one of 4 original Edvard Munch paintings, The Scream, a claim that's been denied in that same New York Times report by Mr. Black's entourage. But still, again, Dan Hazelwood, we're talking about the high and mighty who, by the way, donate to presidential election campaigns.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is part of the impetus where you see a lot of people saying, let's bring out the files and let's figure out who's involved and let's shame or prosecute them as the case may be. So like Larry Summers, the Obama-Biden advisor, he's been shamed. He was targeted by somebody else in the Democratic Party, Elizabeth Warren. She's been arguing with him for many years, so she's using this to her political advantage to marginalize him. You've got Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene in the Republican Party, who for different reasons have decided that they've got animus with Trump. So they're trying to elevate to use this. So this is all coming into a political world. But I think the American public is like, let's see what's there and let's figure out who we should shame and who we should prosecute further. And I think that's sort of a very normal reaction by ordinary people, because one of the things that angers a lot of people, regardless of politics, is that it seems like the rich and powerful get away with too much stuff, whether it's tax evasion or horrific crimes like we have in this case.
So, Alison Shortall, tax breaks for the rich, the lightening of regulations, the lightening of the Internal Revenue Service right now. Does all that stuff matter a little bit more after this Epstein files case coming to a head?
I'm not so sure the American public has the wherewithal to unpack any sophisticated story out of this, other than the actors involved who they will enjoy shaming, to Dan's point. That to me feels like the bulk of where Americans will take this. Where different political actors will take this just has to do with whatever's in the file, and if they can come up with any substance, any agenda item that they can use this information as a tool to promote. So I don't think in its own right it will have any effect, but it remains to be seen how different political actors are going to be able to use what's in there to advance whatever their agenda is. And that can look really diverse depending on both the information and the talent of whoever the political actor is who wants to use it to their advantage.
Donald Trump, by the way, not just mad at journalists. You heard it referenced there by Dan Hazelwood, this MAGA mainstay, Marjorie Taylor Greene, fighting back over the Epstein files, the far-right Georgia congresswoman who stood alongside those victims, one of whom you heard a moment ago, at the Capitol on Tuesday.
He called me a traitor for standing with these women and refusing to take my name off the discharge petition. Let me tell you what a traitor is. A traitor is an American that serves foreign countries and themselves. A patriot is an American that serves the United States of America and Americans like the women standing behind me.
Andrew Weissman, she was speaking as the U.S. president was getting ready to greet the Saudi crown prince on Tuesday. Is something happening inside of MAGA?
Well, that is the fascinating component, as the other guests have been discussing, is that this is not coming just from Donald Trump's political adversaries, but it's coming from within the House, literally the House of Representatives. And you have Republicans and fairly prominent Republicans breaking with the president. It's worth remembering the polling, so they can look and see what is happening in the country and how people feel. And then also remember, they're thinking that we have what's called a lame duck president. In other words, Donald Trump, this is his second term. The Constitution doesn't allow another term. So they're thinking, what's coming next in terms of, are they going to continue, in this instance at least, supporting the president when they can see the polling themselves and they can represent their constituents. Marjorie Taylor Greene being really the most notable, because she had been such a strong supporter of the president and seems to be breaking to the middle. There may be a political agenda for that. I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a political scientist, but she may have her own reasons to do that. But the one thing that is clear is the Epstein scandal has shown sort of weakness in this president. It is one of the few times that you really are seeing the Republican Party itself not be just the Trump Party, and really breaking with him. And I think a large reason of that has to be the polling that you put up, because they can see that even their own political base is upset with how this administration is dealing with the Epstein files.
Is there something, Dan Hazelwood, that Donald Trump managed to keep together in a coalition that got him elected twice that's beginning to fray? And that is, you have people from working class districts who normally don't vote in elections, who feel disenfranchised, who are voting for a candidate who's also supported by big business?
Well, you've got two pieces going on here. And first, as alluded to, Marjorie Taylor Greene has very specific motives of her own. She's been considered one of the most peculiar members of the Republican majority in the House of Representatives for years. She's infamous for talking about Jewish space lasers. She wanted to run for United States Senate in Georgia, and Trump told her no. He's going to try and find a candidate who can defeat, because this is one of the seats Republicans feel that they can pick up. And we're tired of nominating disastrous candidates like Marjorie Taylor Greene and not winning these U.S. Senate seats. So she got bitter and angry, and so she latched on to the Jeffrey Epstein thing to start and prosecute her war that she feels will allow her a base that will allow her to survive the political retribution from Donald Trump. He's already unendorsed her. Massey is famously the Republican who is most anti-Israel in the House of Representatives, and they sort of have this conspiracy going between them that Epstein somehow linked to Israel. These are isolated battles, very personality-driven over specific personal politics of those two people. The larger context, where there is a ripple that Trump needs to be conscious of, and you see him pivoting to starting to try and address it more forcefully. The real polling in America is there's a lot of people who are economically uncertain. They're economically unhappy and uncomfortable, and that might be an understatement. It's not about the Epstein files. It's about how their own standard of living is going. And they punished Joe Biden for that in the belief that it was going to get better under Donald Trump. They don't feel that it's getting better. They don't feel it's getting better fast enough. They're not seeing clear signals from Donald Trump of how it's going to get better. And so they're venting the frustrations. And so the party in power is looking at choppy political waters in a midterm, which is normal. And it's being driven by this standard of living issue, not the Epstein issue, which, is a distraction. What Trump needs to do is get out some messaging that's like, I am going to make your standard of living materially better. That is the pathway to electoral success, and the opposite is the pathway to electoral failure, as the Democrats learned last year.
We'll have to leave it there. So many more questions, though. Dan Hazelwood, thank you so much for joining us from Washington. I want to thank Allison Shortle for being with us from Norman, Oklahoma. Andrew Weissman in London, thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.